Hey, come here. Guess what? The Kremlin console is on its way. PlayStation versus Xbox. Russia versus Ukraine. These are two protracted wars that are both concurrently taking place at the moment. But what you may not realise is that the latter in certain ways is affecting the former. In fact, rather than instantly entering the console war, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has instead launched a special console hardware operation with plans to make a Russian company a dominant force within the world of console gaming. So could the birthplace of Tetris be reinserting itself into the world of gaming? Well, let's find out. In order to understand how we've gotten to this point, we need to turn our attention briefly to geopolitics. So, since the beginning of the special military operation, which began in February of 2022, Russia has been hit with a tidal wave of Western sanctions, which have led to game developers, studios and hardware manufacturers withdrawing from the country after their full-scale invasion of the Ukraine. According to the Russian website kommersant.ru, the president of the Russian Federation instructed the government to organise the production of game consoles and consoles in the country. Kommersant's interlocutors in the video game industry believe that the project will be entrusted to VK, and the contract production of devices will be handled by GS Group. This means that tech companies in the region have been given the tall task of creating home console hardware to rival that of the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. As for the companies that were mentioned by Kommersant, VK is Russia's largest social media network. You need to think of them as being basically Russia's closest approximation to, say, Meta in the region. As for GS Group, they are Russia's largest producer of TV set-top boxes. So in a roundabout way, I can imagine that that's probably why they've been selected to be the producers of this hardware. But still, TV set-top boxes, PlayStation 5s, Xbox Series X's, it's not really comparable, is it? But I suppose beggars can't be choosers. According to NME.com, apparently plans for this project started way back as early as all of the sanctions are starting to roll in from the West. And their website states the following. In 2022, the Russian government discussed measures to support their homegrown video game industry and looked at establishing a state-controlled developer and publisher. The planned project needed an apparent £39.5 billion investment. There was also talk of Russia creating their own game engine, similar to Unity or Unreal Engine, following the tech exodus. The Ministry of Digital Development confirmed to Kommersant that they were discussing with relevant market players the issue of the need for state support in terms of creating their own game engine and its relevant forms. The latest plans for a console were apparently outlined back in April, with a deadline allegedly set for June 2024, so this month. NME also reports that the orders also talk about developers working on the creation of an operating system and a cloud system for delivering games and programs to users a la Steam. A list of presidential instructions that were published officially on the Kremlin's own website actually back this up. Back in January, a meeting took place in Kaliningrad to discuss socio-economic development. And it was here at this meeting where Putin had instructed his people to study the creation of everything that we've just discussed. So while this seems to have taken place, there have been quite a few analysts who have essentially laughed at Russia's proposal, with the common belief being that there is no competence to produce their own PlayStation and Xbox consoles, and creating such a system from scratch will take up to 10 years. Although many people believe that President Vladimir Putin's plan to create technology powerful enough to rival the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X might be a little bit on the outlandish side, for the sake of entertainment and speculation, I have decided to outline to all of you what to expect from the Kremlin console if it were to live up to the president's expectations. So let's cover the absolute perfect console for Putin's Russia. To make the ultimate game console to exist in this era, it needs to have a lot of cultural emphasis that feels distinctly Russian. This would of course have to include the content available for this console. So amongst the titles available, you would have to expect many games that would be celebrating Russian history and culture and achievements. So for the best experience, the Kremlin would like to have historical strategy games, RPGs based on Russian folklore, and Russian military simulations to remind the nation of the military might of Russia. In fact, I have heard that since the beginning of the special military operation in Ukraine, a lot of licensing laws have gone completely out of the window. So therefore, they could consider making an all-new Tetris game and promote it as the return of the greatest franchise in video game history. In fact, they could call this title Tetris Comes Home. I mean, what could be more patriotic than that? A fun video game that also promotes the country's past successes. I mean, who doesn't love Eastern blocks? Beyond software that places a heavy focus on gameplay, what about an education integration? I could imagine the promotion of games that educate players on Russian literature and language, which would be perfect in regions where Russian language is not spoken as much as the government would perhaps like. It's also worth remembering that away from the West, Russia does have some partnerships with a few countries, with the largest one being China. So therefore, full support for Russian language, with high quality translations and voice acting for all games from countries like China, would be paramount to the success of this product. When we also consider that Russia are facing a lot of hostility these days, I suppose that privacy and security would also be hugely important to Russia and its consoles. This means you would expect it to have very strong encryption, and advanced encryption methods would protect user data from outside forces and ensure privacy. All online services and cloud storage operate on servers that would be located within Russia and avoid foreign surveillance, and regular security updates would be rolled out to address vulnerabilities and enhance security features. Another huge factor in making this hardware a success would have to be self-sufficiency. This would mean components sourced and manufactured within Russia itself to avoid needing foreign technology. However, I've got to be honest, I don't see them having any trouble getting any chips that they need from China. Being a Kremlin console, you'd expect it to have its very own custom operating system, so one that's been designed by Russian programmers to ensure complete control over the software environment and updates. I suppose it's obvious as well to expect the assembly and production of these consoles to take place within Russian factories, and then potentially see these consoles start making appearances within the greater sphere of influence that Russia has, just ever so slightly beyond its borders. So something else that I think we could 100% expect from a Kremlin console, and that would be tons and tons and tons of censorship. So I would imagine that any games and media for this console would have to go through a state approval process to make sure that they align with the national values and also to avoid undesirable themes. So I wouldn't expect there to be anything on the hardware that would challenge the status quo in the country at the moment. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, I would imagine that there would be a lot of games that would have a patriotic message to support, well, patriotism for the country, but also to support the message of the state. Building on this, it's expected that there will be state-monitored but community-driven online events, including forums, multiplayer capabilities, and esports competitions. In fact, and here is a fun fact for you, President Putin in Russia has shown more interest than pretty much any other head of state in pretty much the whole wide world that he supports esports.
Right.
And to prove this to you, there's a key point from InsideTheGame.biz. There's an article from 2020 which reads as follows. Russian President Vladimir Putin has expressed his support for the introduction of holding esports tournaments in schools to help Russian gamers perform better at an international level. Among the first nations to officially recognise esports as a sports discipline in 2016, Russia now looks to make esports culture a larger part of the school curriculum alongside traditional sports. And then in 2021, he would also congratulate a Russian esports team who won an international Dota 2 tournament, and he would write to them in the sort of tonality that you would expect for someone who has just won something at the Olympics, for example. On the way to the final, you demonstrated outstanding leadership qualities and solidarity, and in the decisive duel, which became a real test of skill and character, you managed to concentrate and seize the initiative from strong opponents at the most crucial moment. They have proven in practice that our sportsmen are always goal-orientated and capable of conquering any peaks. I wish you continued success and all the best. Meaning, sounds like they've just won like an actual war or something, not an esports event, Jesus. But credit where credit is due, I guess. I can't see other Western leaders speaking to gamers with such a level of respect. Building on Putin's strange relationship with esports, in 2023 he ordered the creation of a new tournament called Cyber Championship. The tournament focuses on games that have been developed within both Russia itself and allied countries, but excludes titles like, for example, Counter-Strike, which are deemed politically biased. Instead, it emphasises on games like World of Tanks and World of Warships, which are now managed in the country itself by Russian entities following their withdrawal from Western companies. I mean, this does get even more bonkers though, because the Russian government has also been actively developing the infrastructure for esports. So that includes updates to training standards, exemptions for esports athletes from things like military service, initiatives to support the establishment of specialised esports battalions. It's just like a strange thing really, isn't it, for a world leader to be so into. Like, I find it fascinating. I mean, it goes a couple of steps further as well, because there's things like efforts going underway to simplify tax regulations for esports arenas and clubs to foster growth within that particular industry. In fact, the Russian government is so engaged in extensive promotion of these kinds of events that they've also included huge coordinated social media campaigns for it. But this also reflects a broader strategy to utilise esports as a tool for nationalistic propaganda and to counter international sanctions and isolation by creating self-reliant and robust domestic esports ecosystems. So in December of last year, Putin had signed a bill to establish a major event called the Games of the Future to be set to take place in a place called Kazan in 2024. So this event is going to be absolutely massive, as in, like, they're investing a budget of about $58 million. $58 million! What this event aims to do is to integrate traditional sports with advanced technologies, esports included within that, and augmented reality with artificial intelligence. It sounds cool, but it also sounds totally bonkers. But yes, I suppose when you take into consideration Putin's relationship with gaming, like he's going this far to promote it, then it does make an awful lot of sense why he feels the need to create a bespoke console just for his country. If this was to come to fruition, the marketing for this I think would be quite an interesting thing to look at if we could even find out about it. But you'd expect there to be sort of national campaigns, advertising which would emphasise patriotism. You'd probably have celebrity endorsements and other kinds of endorsements from like key political figures. I suppose if anyone is allowed to be a key political figure aside from Putin himself. But also I would imagine that there would be like a massive grand launch with key government officials and Russian celebrities to further drive initial sales of that product. Apparently the Kremlin console is a very real thing, and there are multiple reasons which I've just outlined as to why the country's own government would want to have such a piece of hardware sanctioned. Comment below, let me know what you think of all of this and whether you think that my predictions for such a piece of hardware could potentially come to fruition. And if you fancy having up to 90% off of a brand new game, then please click on my affiliate link with Instant Gaming down below in the description and in the pinned comment. And apart from that, subscribe if you haven't already, and I shall see you around in the next video. See you next time.